The room was steeped in shadows, lit only by the dim bluish glow spilling from the window. Rain drummed a steady rhythm against the glass, thick clouds cloaking the moon and casting the world into an unsettling darkness. David sat on the edge of his bed, freshly out of the shower, his towel discarded on the floor. He stretched, feeling the cool air prickle his skin, savoring this quiet, solitary moment in the late hours of the night. No emails, no calls, just the soft hum of existence. But tonight, something felt different. An odd tension lingered in the air, a strange sensation like an itch at the back of his mind, as if the very universe was holding its breath. David shook it off, running a hand through his damp hair. Just a storm, he thought. And then the room cracked open. A blinding flash of light burst into existence at the center of the room, accompanied by a soft, almost musical hum, as though reality itself had gone out of tune. David shot upright, every muscle taut, his heart hammering. Before he could move, the light collapsed inward, leaving behind a shimmering outline that hovered mid-air, a portal. Threads of iridescent silver and blue twisted within it, casting an otherworldly glow on the walls. His heart pounded. What is this? Then she stepped through. Tall and elegant, she moved with a fluid grace, as though gravity bent to her will. As she emerged fully into the room, the portal flickered once and vanished, leaving them bathed in the dim glow of the rainy night. David was rooted to the spot, his breath caught in his throat. She was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Her skin shimmered like moonlit waves, a soft shade of blue with hints of violet that danced across her frame. Long silver hair cascaded down her back, glinting as though woven with stardust. Her eyes, glowing with an inner light, were an impossible blend of azure and gold, swirling like galaxies. David felt a surge of vulnerability. Here he was, naked and stunned, standing before a creature that seemed to have stepped straight out of a dream or a nightmare. His voice broke as he tried to speak. "Who are you?" Her gaze locked onto his, her expression a blend of curiosity and something darker, more intense. She tilted her head as if studying him, her eyes sharp and unyielding. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Then suddenly her voice slipped into his mind, soft but commanding, laced with an alien cadence that was as beautiful as it was strange. "You are the one." David gasped, stumbling back, his mind scrambling to make sense of what was happening. "The one?" The words echoed in his thoughts, foreign yet hauntingly familiar. She took a step forward, her gaze sweeping over him with deliberate intensity. There was no embarrassment in her eyes, no trace of modesty. If anything, she seemed satisfied, as though she had found precisely what she had been looking for. "For the continuation of my species," she said, her voice calm and unyielding, like a fact that could not be questioned. "You will breed with me." The words landed like a blow to David's chest. This couldn't be real. None of it could. But as he looked into her glowing eyes, he knew with a sickening clarity that this was no dream. The cold floor beneath his feet, the damp scent of rain drifting through the window, the sound of his own pulse pounding in his ears, it was all achingly real. He backed away, pressing himself against the wall, his breath shallow and rapid. "Wait, hold on. You can't just... What are you talking about?" Her name slid into his mind as effortlessly as a thought, as though it had been planted there. Lyra. She did not blink, her presence as steady and absolute as a mountain. "Your kind is compatible," she said, her voice echoing faintly in his skull. "The ritual must begin." David's throat tightened, panic clawing at his senses. No, wait, you can't just..." He stopped, realizing how ridiculous he sounded. He was arguing with an alien in his bedroom, while he stood there utterly exposed, grasping for any shred of sanity. This isn't how things work here. We have boundaries." Lyra tilted her head, as though the concept of boundaries was foreign to her. There was no malice in her gaze, only purpose, an unbreakable resolve. "There is no time," she said, her voice as steady as stone. With a slow, deliberate movement, she raised a hand, and the room pulsed with warmth. David felt a tingling at the base of his spine, spreading swiftly over his skin. His body grew slack, his mind fogging over with an odd, dreamlike haze, as though invisible threads were pulling him gently, inescapably toward her. His voice was a weak whisper. "Wait." But even as he spoke, he felt himself drawn in, a small part of him, some primal instinct, aching to give in, to surrender to the strange connection crackling between them. David's limbs felt like lead, his muscles betraying him with a warm, numbing sensation. The tingling coursed through his veins, threading his body to the presence before him, to her. Every breath he took felt heavier, laden with an unspoken, unshakable purpose radiating from this otherworldly woman, this alien princess, Laura. She stepped closer, her bare feet making no sound on the floor. Each of her movements was a graceful whisper, as if the air itself bent to accommodate her presence. David could feel the weight of her gaze, intense and unwavering, sweeping over him. Her eyes, alive with swirling colors, held a strange mix of purpose and longing, a curiosity edged with the undeniable power of someone who had crossed galaxies to be here, in this moment, with him. What do you mean, compatible?" he stammered, his voice barely audible over the relentless drumming of the rain outside. Laura's lips parted, though her words echoed directly in his mind rather than through sound. "Your essence is what we need. The survival of my kind rests on the connection we form here tonight." David's heart pounded against his ribcage, his mind recoiling from the implication. Survival? His pulse quickened as he struggled to process the gravity of her words. He tried to shake off the paralysis that gripped him, to wrest control of his own body, but every fiber of his being seemed bound to her will. She took another step closer, her scent. A delicate floral fragrance tinged with something unfamiliar filled the air around him, disorienting and intoxicating. There was no hostility in her expression, no aggression, only a calm, implacable determination that left no room for negotiation. To her, this was destiny, a path she had chosen to walk without hesitation. With a shaky breath, David pressed himself harder against the wall, his mind racing. I didn't agree to this," he managed, though his voice sounded weak, almost pleading. Her gaze softened, just for a moment, and in her eyes he glimpsed a flicker of something unexpected. Vulnerability? Sadness? But the emotion vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by that same unwavering resolve. "Your ancestors were marked," she continued, her voice as soft and insistent as the hum of electricity in the air. "Long ago, a fragment of our essence was passed down through your bloodline, waiting for the right moment to awaken. You carry within you the legacy we need to survive." The room spun as her words sank in, chilling him to his core. "You're saying that I'm part of this? Some kind of prophecy?" Her face remained impassive, yet her voice softened. "It is more than a prophecy. It is survival. If we do not act, my people will vanish, lost to the shadows of time. This ritual is our only hope, and you are the key." David's mind raced, battling the impulse to flee with a curiosity that gnawed at him, almost against his will. He could feel the truth of her words, resonating with something deep and ancient within him, a strange awareness stirring in the very marrow of his bones. But there was fear, too, a bone-deep dread of surrendering himself to a fate he couldn't control or even fully understand. I need time. I don't even know you. I don't understand." He stopped, his voice faltering under her steady gaze. "Time is a luxury my people do not have," Laura said, her eyes searching his with an intensity that made his skin prickle. Her hand reached toward him, stopping just inches from his face, her fingertips glowing faintly. "You are bound to this, David, as am I." The air between them felt charged, alive with an energy that pulsed like a heartbeat. David's instincts screamed at him to resist, to do anything to break the strange spell that held him captive. But something deeper, something primal, whispered to him to yield, to trust the rhythm of this connection, as though it were a part of him he'd always known yet never acknowledged. His mouth felt dry as he struggled to find his voice. But why me? A hint of sadness darkened her gaze, and she lowered her hand. Because, she murmured, almost too softly to hear, you are the only one left who can save us. The weight of her words settled over him like a shroud, thick with a solemnity he couldn't deny. Somewhere in the depths of her luminous eyes, he saw the weight of 1,000 unspoken sorrows, a desperation too raw to conceal. She was a stranger to him, and yet, in that moment, he felt an inexplicable kinship, a bond that transcended the boundaries of reason. Her fingers hovered above his skin once more, and he could feel the heat radiating from her palm, as though her very essence pulsed with life. When her hand finally made contact, it was as if a spark had ignited within him, a warmth that spread through his veins, filling him with a strange sense of calm. For a fleeting moment, the fear ebbed, replaced by something else, something vast and unknowable. As he met her gaze, he realized with a sense of foreboding that there was no turning back. This was his path now, whether he chose it or not. David's breath came in shallow gasps, each one trembling as the reality of his situation closed in around him. He was no longer just himself, a solitary human with a small life in an endless universe. Now he was somehow bound to a cosmic fate he didn't ask for, tethered to this mysterious, powerful being whose very touch seemed to alter the rhythm of his heart. Laura's hand lingered on his chest, her touch both electrifying and strangely soothing. Her gaze had softened as if sensing his internal struggle, the fear tangled with curiosity, and an odd sense of duty that was beginning to take root despite his initial resistance. "There is more you need to see," she whispered in his mind, her voice carrying a tone of gentle insistence, layered with a sorrow she could no longer hide. David's mouth went dry as he watched her raise her hand, moving it slowly in a graceful arc. The air around them began to shimmer, bending and twisting, as though reality itself was molding to her will. He felt a dizzying shift, a sensation like falling without movement, as the walls of his room faded into darkness, replaced by a vision, a memory that wasn't his. The scene that unfolded before him was otherworldly, yet breathtaking. He saw towering crystal spires that reached into a lavender sky, rivers that glowed like liquid silver, and forests of shimmering trees with leaves that sparkled like gemstones. The world was alien, unfamiliar, yet undeniably beautiful. But there was something wrong, a darkness that marred the beauty, a creeping sickness that spread across the land, staining the vibrant colors with shadows. Ilara's voice resonated within him, laced with a depth of sorrow he had never known. "This was my home, once a realm of life and light. But that light began to fade, a shadow spreading across our land. Our people, once radiant with energy, began to weaken. Our bodies grew fragile, our spirits dimmed. We searched for answers, for a cure, but every effort led us deeper into despair." David watched, feeling her grief wash over him like a tide, her emotions seeping into his consciousness. He felt the desperation of her people, their fading hope, their struggle against an unstoppable force. The image shifted, and he saw Laura herself, younger, surrounded by her kind, strong, proud, and luminous. But as the sickness spread, he could see them wither, their once brilliant light dimming into shadows. "What happened?" he whispered, the words barely audible as the vision unfolded around him. "Our only hope lay in ancient prophecies," she continued, her voice steady yet threaded with an ancient pain. "A union, a bond between our kind and a human of specific lineage. Someone who carries a dormant spark, a fragment of our essence waiting to awaken. It was our only chance." The vision twisted, and David saw himself as a young boy playing in the sunlight, unaware of the strange glow that seemed to surround him, marking him in ways he couldn't see or understand. He saw fragments of his own life, forgotten moments from his childhood, woven with an energy he had never noticed, as though something alien had been silently guiding him, waiting for this moment. The vision shattered, and David was back in his room, gasping for breath. His skin prickled with cold sweat, his heart racing as he tried to comprehend what he had seen. "You're saying I've always been part of this? That I'm somehow connected to you?" Elara's expression softened, a flicker of something close to compassion in her eyes. "Yes, it was written in the stars long before you were born. Your ancestors carried this bond through their bloodline, passing it down until it reached you. The spark lay dormant, waiting, until now." David's mind reeled, the weight of her words settling over him like a crushing wave. "But why didn't I know? Why didn't anyone know?" Her gaze hardened, the determination returning, mingling with a strange vulnerability. "Because it was meant to happen now. This moment, this union. It is our last chance. Without it, my people will fade, and everything we once were will vanish with us. I came here because you are the only one who can help us." The enormity of it all hit him in a cold rush. An entire civilization was depending on him, on his choice. The quiet, sheltered life he had led until now felt like a distant memory, almost laughable compared to the gravity of what lay before him. Yet a question lingered, gnawing at him, a question he couldn't ignore. "And what about me?" he asked, his voice trembling. "What happens to me if I go through with this?" Elra's eyes dropped for the first time, a shadow crossing her face. She took a slow, measured breath, as though the answer weighed on her more than she could bear. "If you agree, you will become more than you are now. Your essence will change, merging with ours. It is not a simple union, David. It is a transformation. Parts of you may be lost." A shiver ran down his spine, a surge of fear clawing at his thoughts. "So, I'll stop being me?" Her hand found his, her touch gentle as though grounding him. "Number you will still be you, but altered, awakened. There is a risk, yes, a risk I cannot deny. But I cannot ask you to do this without knowing that it is your choice. I do not want to force you." David closed his eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath, his mind spinning with the enormity of it all. His life had been so small, so ordinary until this moment, and now he was being asked to make a choice that would alter not only his own fate, but the fate of an entire species. When he opened his eyes, he saw the quiet plea in Lura's gaze, a vulnerability she had tried so hard to hide. For the first time, he saw her not as an alien princess, but as a being desperate to save her people, as someone who had crossed the boundaries of space and time in search of hope. And somehow, against all odds, she had found it in him. I don't know if I can do this," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "But if I say yes, what happens then?" A faint glimmer of hope flickered in her eyes, her hand squeezing his gently. "Then we begin the ritual. Together we will forge a bond that transcends our worlds, our histories, and together we will create a legacy that will endure beyond both of us." David felt the weight of her words, the gravity of the choice he was about to make. He had no idea what lay ahead, what this ritual would demand of him, but he sensed, with an instinctive certainty, that there was no turning back. Whatever happened next, it would change him forever. And in the depth of Elra's gaze, he saw a promise of something larger than himself, something that would transcend the bounds of fear and uncertainty. With a trembling breath, he nodded, a quiet resolve settling in his chest. "Then, let's begin." The room seemed to thrum with an energy that David had never felt before, thick and electric, almost alive. As his whispered agreement lingered in the air, Elra's expression shifted, a subtle relief washing over her features. She closed her eyes, murmuring something in a language he couldn't understand, the sound both haunting and beautiful. like a forgotten song carried on the wind. When she opened her eyes again, they blazed with intensity, glowing brighter, as if the promise they'd just made had awakened something deep within her. David felt a shiver run through him, an anticipation mingling with fear, the weight of his decision settling heavily in his chest. This wasn't just a commitment to Laura, it was a commitment to a path from which he could never return. Laura extended her hand, her fingers hovering inches from his. "Take my hand," she whispered into his mind. "The ritual must begin with a connection of trust." David hesitated, his gaze flickering from her outstretched hand to her face. Her features were serene yet resolute, her eyes carrying an unspoken plea. This was more than a formality. This was a vow, binding them in a way that transcended words. With a deep breath, he placed his hand in hers, feeling the warmth of her skin, the faint pulse of energy that thrummed beneath it, as if her very essence was alive with purpose. The instant their hands met, a surge of energy shot through him, raw and powerful, filling him with sensations he couldn't begin to describe. His vision blurred, and he felt as though he were floating, suspended between worlds. The walls of his room faded, dissolving into an expanse of swirling lights and shadows, a liminal space that felt neither here nor there. Laura's voice echoed softly in his mind. "Close your eyes, David. Let go of everything you know. Trust the pull of this connection. It will guide you." He closed his eyes, his mind slipping into a strange, almost dreamlike state. He felt himself drifting, losing his sense of self, his edges blurring as though he were becoming part of something greater, something beyond his understanding. Images began to swirl in his mind, fragments of memories that were both his and not his. Snapshots of places he had never seen, of people who were not his family, yet felt deeply familiar. Then he felt Laura's presence enveloping him, a warm glow wrapping around his consciousness, holding him steady as the visions deepened. In his mind's eye, he saw her world again, but this time, he was part of it. He could feel the life pulsing through the crystalline cities, the vibrant energy that once filled her people. But he also felt the decay, the encroaching darkness that had crept over everything, draining the color and warmth until all that was left was a husk of what had once been. "This bond," Laura's voice was a whisper, fragile and solemn, "is more than just survival. It is a merging of two worlds. Through this connection, my people will carry forward, and so will a part of yours. Our fates are now intertwined." David's pulse quickened as he felt himself being drawn deeper into the ritual. His awareness blurred and shifted, and he felt Laura's presence as if she were inside him, her thoughts, her emotions, all woven into the very fabric of his mind. A fierce determination, a grief older than time itself, a desperate hope, all of it wrapped around him, binding them together. Then, just as quickly, the visions shifted. He saw himself, standing at the edge of a vast, unfamiliar landscape. It was a place of unearthly beauty, strange flora and fauna pulsing with faint light, as if each leaf and blade of grass were imbued with the same ethereal glow as Laura. And beside him, she stood, watching him with a solemn expression, her hand outstretched. He knew instinctively that he was glimpsing their shared future, an uncertain path through an alien world, a journey that only the two of them could undertake. But the beauty of the vision was marred by a shadow lurking at the edges, a darkness that clung to the corners, waiting to pounce. David could feel it in the pit of his stomach, an unshakable dread that told him their union was not without cost. As the vision faded, he opened his eyes to find himself back in his room, his hand still clasped in Laura's. She looked at him with an intensity that made his breath catch, as if she were searching his soul, measuring his resolve. "You now see what we must face," she said softly. "Our path will be fraught with danger, with forces that will try to pull us apart, to end what we are creating here. This bond is a threat to many, and they will not allow it to exist without a fight." David's heart pounded as he looked into her eyes, feeling the weight of her words settle over him like a cloak. "Why me?" he asked, the question raw, desperate. Why was I chosen, out of all the people in the world? She held his gaze, her expression softening. Because your blood carries the spark of our people, a legacy passed down through generations. This bond was written long before you or I ever existed. It is fate, David. We were destined to meet, to join, to create a new path together. A part of him recoiled at the finality of it all, the sense of inevitability pressing down on him like a weight. He was just one man, an ordinary human caught in a struggle that stretched across galaxies. And yet, he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward her, the strange, undeniable connection that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Then what happens now? He whispered, his voice barely audible. Elora took a step closer, her eyes holding his with an unyielding intensity. Now, we complete the ritual, she said, her voice a blend of strength and vulnerability. Once it is done, our essences will be merged, bound in ways that go beyond our understanding. We will become something new, something that has never existed before. David felt his heart quicken, a mix of fear and wonder twisting inside him. This was it, the point of no return. Whatever lay on the other side of this ritual would change him forever, binding him to a destiny he could barely comprehend. But as he looked into Laura's eyes, the weight of the unknown didn't seem quite so daunting. He felt a quiet sense of purpose settle over him, a certainty that had been absent before. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with her. With a slow, steady breath, he nodded, letting his fear fall away, leaving only resolve in its place. Then let's finish it. In response, Laura's eyes shimmered and a faint smile touched her lips, filled with a gratitude that needed no words. Together, they would step into the unknown, into a bond that defied time and space, a union that held the weight of two worlds. And as their hands tightened around each other, the room pulsed with an energy that seemed to resonate with the very core of the universe, binding them to a fate neither of them could escape. As the ritual deepened, the air around them thickened with a potent, almost intoxicating energy. David felt his body grow warm, his skin prickling with an unfamiliar sensation as the world around him blurred, melting away into a realm that existed somewhere between his mind and Laura's. They were no longer in his room. They were someplace else, a space that pulsed with life and light, their combined consciousness flowing through it like rivers merging into an ocean. Laura held his gaze, her luminous eyes drawing him in as if she were reaching into the depths of his soul. "This is the point where our essences must align," she said softly, her voice a gentle hum in his mind. "Open yourself to me, David. Let go of everything you know, and let us become one." David's heart raced as her words sank in. Every instinct he had told him to resist, to hold on to his sense of self, his human identity. But something deeper, something almost primal, urged him to surrender, to trust the strange, undeniable connection that bound them together. He closed his eyes, letting go of his fears, his doubts, everything that held him tethered to his old life. As he surrendered, a flood of sensations washed over him. He could feel her presence inside him, her memories, her emotions, her very essence, seeping into his consciousness like a slow, steady tide. Images danced before his mind's eye, fragments of a life he had never known yet felt profoundly familiar. He saw flashes of her world, her people, their struggles, their moments of joy and sorrow woven together into a tapestry that stretched across centuries. And then he saw her. Not the enigmatic figure who had stepped into his room, but a younger, more vulnerable version of her, surrounded by friends, laughter in her eyes, her heart unburdened by the weight of fate. He felt her dreams, her hopes, her love for her people, a fierce, unyielding devotion that burned within her like a flame. But he also felt the pain, the ache of loss as the darkness crept into their lives, the desperation as they searched for a way to survive, the quiet resignation as she accepted her role as the last hope for her people. In that moment, David felt a surge of empathy, a deep, aching understanding that transcended words. She wasn't just an alien princess. She was someone who had loved and lost, who had fought against the inevitable, who had sacrificed everything for the survival of her kind. And now, she was here, standing beside him, trusting him with her life, her future, her very soul. A tremor ran through him, and he opened his eyes to find her watching him, her gaze filled with a vulnerability he had never seen before. "You see me now," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "Not as a stranger, but as a part of you. Do you understand?" He nodded, his chest tight with a mix of emotions he couldn't fully name. "I do," he murmured, his voice thick with a strange sense of reverence. I understand." A faint smile touched her lips, soft and sad, as if she had been waiting her entire life for this moment. She reached up, her fingers grazing his cheek, and he felt a warmth spread through him, filling him with a calm, steady certainty. Whatever fears he had felt before seemed distant now, overshadowed by the depth of the connection they shared. "Then we are ready," she said, her voice steady, though he could sense the underlying tremor, a hint of vulnerability that she could not quite hide. She raised her other hand, and the space around them began to pulse, a low, rhythmic thrum that seemed to resonate with the very core of his being. He felt as though he were part of something vast and ancient, a force that spanned galaxies, binding them together in a ritual older than time itself. Their surroundings shifted again, and they found themselves standing in a vast, open field under a sky filled with swirling stars, the ground beneath their feet glowing faintly, as if alive. David realized with a start that this wasn't just a vision. It was a place that existed beyond the boundaries of either world, a realm that belonged to both of them and neither of them. Elra stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "This is the final stage of the ritual," she said, her voice a soft, steady guide in the surreal landscape. "Our energies must merge fully, our souls must align. This is where we become one, where we create a bond that cannot be broken." He swallowed, his heart pounding as he felt the intensity of her words settle over him. This was it, the point of no return. Once they completed this final step, he would be changed forever, bound to her in ways he could scarcely comprehend. But the fear that had haunted him before was gone, replaced by a quiet resolve, a sense of purpose that filled him with strength he hadn't known he possessed. "I'm ready," he whispered, his voice steady and sure. Lara's gaze softened, and she took his hands in hers, their fingers entwining as a surge of energy passed between them, warm and vibrant, like the heartbeat of a living being. He felt the connection deepen, a steady rhythmic pulse that seemed to echo through his very soul, binding him to her in a way that defied logic, defied reason. As they stood there, hands clasped, the stars above them began to pulse, their light growing brighter, filling the space with a warmth that seemed to seep into his bones. He felt himself dissolving, his sense of self blurring, merging with hers until he could no longer tell where he ended and she began. It was as if their minds, their hearts, their very souls had fused, creating something new, something that belonged to both of them and neither of them. And then he felt it. A spark, a tiny, brilliant spark that ignited within him, filling him with a warmth that spread through every fiber of his being. It was the essence of life itself, a force that transcended flesh and bone, something ancient and primal, a connection that went beyond the physical, beyond the mental, reaching into the very depths of their souls. He gasped, the sensation overwhelming, as if he were on the brink of something monumental, something that would change him forever. And in that moment, he understood. This was not just a ritual. It was an awakening. A transformation that would bind him to her for all eternity. Lara's voice echoed softly in his mind, filled with a quiet, reverent awe. "We are one now, David. Our souls are bound, our fates entwined. Whatever lies ahead, we will face it together." He felt a tear slip down his cheek, the weight of her words settling over him like a benediction, a promise that went beyond the limits of time and space. They stood there, in that sacred place, their souls entwined, their energies merged, bound to each other in a bond that defied explanation. And as the stars above them burned with a fierce, unyielding light, he knew that he had found something he hadn't known he was searching for. A purpose, a connection, a love that transcended everything he had ever known. For better or worse, they were bound together, two souls woven into one. And whatever challenges awaited them, whatever trials they would face, he knew, deep in his heart, that they would face it together. The pulsing light of the stars above slowly dimmed, leaving David and Lyra standing in the quiet stillness of their boundless realm, their energies now fused, their destinies forever intertwined. David could feel the shift within him, an unfamiliar but comforting sense of strength and belonging, as though he had shed an old skin and emerged as something more, something greater than he had ever been alone. Lyra's hand was still in his, her eyes soft yet intense as she studied his face, searching for something, perhaps a sign, an understanding. "We have crossed the threshold," she whispered in his mind, her voice carrying a weight of reverence and relief. "From this moment forward, we are no longer separate. We are one." David nodded, feeling the truth of her words resonate within him. The connection between them was no longer an abstract idea. It was a living, breathing force, pulsing with energy that he could feel in every part of himself. He was not alone, and he knew now, with a certainty he could never have imagined, that he would never be alone again. But as they stood in the silence, a shadow flickered across Lyra's face, a hesitation that made David's heart clench. "There is one final truth you must know," she said, her voice steady but tinged with a sadness that cut through him. "The bond we have created is not without sacrifice." He frowned, feeling a prickle of unease as he met her gaze. What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lyra's expression softened, and she took a deep breath, as though steeling herself. "When our souls merged, when our energies became one, a part of you was given to me, just as a part of me now resides within you. This bond cannot be undone, but it comes at a cost." David's pulse quickened, the gravity of her words settling over him like a shadow. "What will happen to me?" he asked, his voice trembling. "You will live," she replied gently, "but you will be different. You may find that parts of your old self begin to fade, replaced by what we have become together. And one day, when your human life comes to an end, your essence will endure, bound to mine, and you will join me in a form beyond mortality." The weight of her words hit him like a tidal wave. His life, his identity, all that he had once been would slowly transform, evolving into something else. He would not be the same man he was before. He would be something new, someone he could not yet fully understand. The old life he had known was gone, left behind on the other side of this transformation. But as he looked into her eyes, he felt a strange, quiet peace settle over him. He had already known deep down that this journey would change him, that there was no returning to the ordinary existence he had once clung to. And despite the fear, the uncertainty, he felt a fierce resolve burning within him, a determination to embrace this new life, this new path, no matter where it led. "I understand," he whispered, his voice steady, a calm acceptance filling his heart. "I am ready." A soft smile curved across Lyra's lips, and she stepped closer, her hand resting gently on his chest. "You have given me a gift beyond measure," she said, her voice filled with gratitude and something deeper, something that went beyond words. "You have saved not only me, but all those I hold dear. My people will endure because of you." He reached up, his hand brushing her cheek, feeling the warmth of her skin beneath his fingertips. "And I think," he said softly, "you've saved me too. You showed me something I never thought possible. You showed me that I could be more than I was." They stood together in the vast, silent space, their hands entwined, the connection between them as real and tangible as the ground beneath their feet. He could feel the depth of her love, her gratitude, her fierce determination to protect the life they had just created together, a bond that would span beyond time, beyond death. "Our journey is just beginning," she murmured, her voice a promise, her gaze unwavering. "There is a whole universe waiting for us, a world that we will shape together." David nodded, feeling the weight of their shared purpose settle over him like a cloak. They would face countless challenges, trials he couldn't yet imagine, but they would face them as one, their souls bound in a way that nothing could break. And as they stood there, bathed in the gentle glow of the fading stars, David felt a calm certainty settle over him. He had found his purpose, his destiny, in the most unlikely of places. And whatever lay ahead, he knew that they would face it side by side, their love and their bond a beacon of hope in a world that had once felt so impossibly vast and lonely. With one final lingering look, they turned to face the future, a journey stretching before them into the unknown, a path that belonged to them alone. And as they stepped forward, hand in hand, David knew with a quiet, unshakable resolve that he had finally found his place in the universe.